Well, this is not a video that I was intending to make, but I'm going to seize the opportunity. Today I'm at Hopewells Furnace in Elverson, Pennsylvania, and they're having a big event where they're opening the whole place up and doing a bunch of demonstrations. Hopewells Furnace is a place where they used to form iron into things they could sell, such as furnaces, beams, whatever else. Matter of fact, we're going to go down and talk to some people and find out, do a history lesson. So stay tuned for any of you history buffs that want to know where welding came from, because this is where it started. I'm going to start right here at the mill. This is where they form all the iron and do the aluminum castings and all sorts of fun stuff like that. So we're going to go take a peek. So this is where they stored all the charcoal that they made in order to run the furnace. Guys known as fillers would take wheelbarrows, fill them up with charcoal, and go from this shed all the way across to the top of the furnace there and put it in the loader, which is right up top there. I just got to go find the collier because they're going to light the collier here in about 5 minutes.
I'm one of the volunteer colliers around here. We are here today to start lighting the pile to start the process of making charcoal. The charcoal process is not burning wood, it is baking the water out of the wood. So if you'll see the leaves underneath first, you'll see dirt. Leaves are to keep it's like an insulation and to keep the dirt on there. Dirt is to keep as much air out of there as possible, but you have to have a little bit, but you don't want to get a whole lot. When we're done in about a week, this pile will be from this size to about this size. Because the moisture will be coming out of it. The reason we have to make charcoal is wood doesn't burn hot enough to make iron. But charcoal burns at 3,000 degrees approximately. That's what you need to convert the ore to the iron. Any questions? Eric over there with the shovel, you gonna light it today?
Yes, he is.
Yep, Eric's gonna light the thing. Well, it's not like me where I can just
burning coals. There goes the burning coals.
I want to do it too.
I'm not seeing really fire. So are you just gonna put hot coals on it, or are you gonna actually make a fire?
Hot coals are gonna start the fire. Because hot coals are hot. Now you can see the smoke burning up. Now we're going to wait until, in a little while, you'll see flames coming up. That's why we know it started. Then we're going to look for steam to come out of the bottom. That way we know it got all the way to the bottom and air circulate, enough things circulating that we can cap it and cover the top. See those wood up on top?
Yeah.
We slide them over the hole, throw more leaves on it, and throw more dirt on it. They're in the middle of that pile is what we call the chimney. It's a triangular thing, and we put wood in it, so that part there, that's where the hole is. That's where we start the burning. That we want that to catch first to get the heat going to spread out. We don't want it to catch the whole thing at once. That would mess up our pan. The big ones will bake.
So that collier has wood inside of it, and they cover it with dirt. So the inside is just wood. What they do at the top there is they start the fire up top, allow it to kind of travel down through the wood, and then they put those big logs on top, over top of the fire, and bake the moisture out of it, and that's how you make charcoal. So now we'll go down and see how they pour molds. Now I already talked to the demonstrator down there, and he said they're going to use aluminum instead of iron. Aluminum melts at 1300 degrees, and the iron melts at 3000. So to keep everybody safe and to keep the heat down, they're going to do a demonstration with aluminum. Not only that, aluminum is a lot lighter and easier to move around.
Mary. She's going to be doing our demonstration for us as I narrate what exactly she's going to be doing. And we're also accompanied by volunteer Brian Glaze, who is a very, very knowledgeable gentleman in terms of molding and casting, and he's going to help us with the furnace that's right behind me here. So today is Establishment Day, as I mentioned before. This event that we have been doing for several years now commemorates this park's incorporation into the National Park Service, and coincidentally today it was done on August 3rd, 1938. So after all of these years, since Hopewells Furnace has been a park, we have been bringing to you all of these demonstrations to give you an idea of what 19th century iron community was like. I'm going to bring you guys back to 1771. This landscape here in southeast Pennsylvania and also in Maryland, which is why we have folks from Catoctin Mountain Park that you can talk with that's on south of the park grounds here. All this landscape is surrounded and embedded with this particular stone. This stone here is iron ore. When you think about modern technology, when you think about our modern infrastructure, and even the infrastructure historically, a lot of what we have to deal with in terms of our building material is generated and stemmed from just a simple stone. When you think about that, you can just find this all over this landscape, but the real knowledge and the experience is how can you turn that into a product. So in 1771, Mark Bird is going to erect the furnace directly behind me. The furnace is a 30-foot tall stone structure that was created to do just that. Break apart the impurities in that stone and separate it from the iron to allow the iron to be made into different products. To be made into a product requires a particular task, which Mary is going to demonstrate momentarily. But how you can get rid of the impurities is you have to incorporate limestone. And the limestone was found about 5 miles to the southwest in modern-day Morgantown, if you guys are all from Pennsylvania, but it's in that direction. This limestone is mostly calcium carbonate. It's a natural mineral found underneath of us, but it will stick to all of the stuff in the ore that is not iron, and it will hover on the top, on the bottom of that furnace there. Now today is a pretty unique day when we do this demonstration because think about your energy source. The reason why Mark Bird developed this furnace so far removed from Philadelphia where everybody is living in the 1770s is because what is out here, the abundance of trees in order to convert to energy. So the energy, which is unique for our Establishment Day, we have a demonstration of how that energy was made on a very, very small scale. So if you've gone up and saw the colliers doing what they're doing, that is just a 2-cord pile of logs. Historically, colliers would have been stacking approximately a 25 to 30-cord pile of log pit. And what they're doing is they are baking out the impurities of the wood. Things like moisture, sap, and all the dust and dirt that can be found in the trunks of the trees, they need to bake that out. Once you've done that, your new product can burn 3 times as hot, which is what we need to melt down all of the iron ore and the limestone. So that is historically how Hopewells furnace was used. And once the furnace was created, the community will develop around us. Because of the amount of jobs that were needed here, you needed a place for people to buy things, store their materials, store their animals, house all of the workers, and a blacksmith so that they could fix all the materials out here. So what we're going to be doing today is this half tin man looking structure. This is our modern day cupola, and we're going to be not working with iron today, but we're going to be working with aluminum, and we're going to cast that demo. So a very particular job that was done in here is the molder, which Mary is going to replicate here. So we're going to go over the steps of how a molder would have done each of the main phases, and we're going to talk about all of the equipment that Mary has that a molder would have been using. So Mary is holding a single stove plate. This was the main product that was going to be casted here, made out of iron in the 1820s and the 1830s, largely the era of history that Hopewells furnace today that we interpret. The plate is just going to be a simple wooden pattern. It's made out of wood because what can you do to wood very easily? You can carve into it. You can't really carve that easily into metal. And so before we begin to make our mold, we're going to coat it with a simple dust made out of limestone. It allows the sand to be not so sticky to the pattern when we're ready to remove the pattern out of the mold. job that you saw at 11 o'clock is the collier. And the collier would have allowed, very, very grateful, and said, here, take some of this charcoal dust. Here you go, molder. And the molder would have coated their pattern in charcoal dust historically. But we have a lot of safety staff that would not be so proud and glad if we were using charcoal dust today, so we're going to use crushed limestone. What Mary has is a giant, think of it like a colander, almost as if you're letting all the water out of your pasta. But this is called a riddle, and the riddle is going to allow the sand to be sifted. On top of our pattern, we want to get very fine sifted sand. There's a particular element inside of our sand that's a little bit of clay, and the clay allows it to bind together to make the mold. And because of that, it's also a negative on the molder because the clay wants to stick together. And if you have a small gem of clay that is sitting on the pattern and you pour the iron on, it's not going to get in the detail that you want. So you want to sift that clay and make it as fine as possible. This part is going to be the most rigorous because look at the size of the flask that Mary's working with. If you want to see a little bit more of to scale the flask that they were using, if everybody can see the flask. And the flask, when I say that term, is this box structure. This is called a flask. The flask they would have used probably about double the size of it. There's some examples over by the stone wall to your left. And look at all of the sand that is required. And every inch of that flask must be pounded and collected together in order for it to work together. Think of sand as a giant baseball team. I see a lot of Phillies shirts out there. Think of it as a giant baseball team. They have to work together, and if there's a weak spot, think about what exactly this process does. By combining all the sand and pounding it together, not only are you making a complete and solidified mold, what you're actually doing is you're imprinting the sand on top of the pattern that's found at the bottom. Because what is our ultimate objective? We're trying to make a picture. We're trying to make an embedded picture in the sand. And so by doing that, it requires a little bit of force to push that sand and get all the detail defined in your sand mold. So the next thing we're going to do is, we've already buried the sand, or we buried the pattern in the sand. We need to expose that pattern now. We want to see the back of it. And how could Mary see the pattern without taking any sand out? So you're going to flip it. Very good. Thank you. So we're going to flip this entire flask. This is probably about 30 to 40 pounds. Again, this is about half the size of what a mold would have been. So just imagine that endurance, that fatigue that you're going to exhaust by trying to flip that thing. And help us so that nothing shifts. Mary applies bottom of the patterns. We're looking at a flat top. What Mary's doing is almost think of like, go back to your medieval times classes. And what was that feature that surrounded your castle? Anyone remember what that was called? That was filled with water. You know it?
A moat.
A moat. So we're going to create almost like the equivalent of a moat around the pattern. What it's going to do is help us in the long run. We need to do one more step. We need to make that top tier first before we take this pattern out and expose the image. But so that we make it a little bit easier and more compact of the sand. The sand's going to want to go anywhere it wants. So that we can make it a lot easier and control where the sand is going to want to gravitate towards. We're going to make a moat around that pattern so that we get it all nice and neat and patted down, and it allows us to expose a corner to pull out that pattern easier in the future steps. 200. 100, 150, 280. Rule of thumb is well over half of that is going to be a woodcutter felling all these trees and converting and sending that over to the colliers. If a woodcutter decides, you got a 16-year-old woodcutter and he's like, you know what? So you can just take a small hammer and just pound it off. Now when you're cleaning that, it's technically called cleaning. Directly at the furnace. The rule of thumb is if you were working inside this building, you most likely, not that you were guaranteed, but you most likely lived in the tenant houses down the road, because who is necessary to actually get to work quickly is going to be who works in here. So the molders most likely lived down the road. And on days like today, when you have a hot, steamy day, like I mentioned in the beginning, there is no off time. So as the furnace is in blast, the molder is going to have to come on out here, walk down that lane and come on out. And make sure that these steps are going to be completed. Because the furnace isn't going to stop. You've got to constantly fill that thing. It's constantly being charged. King Riller rushing down 23 200 years ago, you probably would have heard it for several miles. But that told the local community and everybody living here that iron was ready to be removed. And so what did that tell the molder? I better get my mold ready. If I'm not ready yet, I better get that finished. All right, so now we have to remove the pattern. Mary has finished the second tier, which is our next step. We're going to move this pattern. We're going to put that second tier back on so that what? We're going to just have that is going to be now inserted on top. So what we're going to do, Brian Glaze is going to assist Mary to bring this in the front of the room. And we are going to put on our PPE, our personal protective equipment. And we're using a lot more today. We've got some safety officers with a mindful eye watching us doing this demonstration. But historically, all they would have had is just leather gloves, an apron, and a very interesting, not necessarily the molders that wear these, but a particular job taking the iron out of the furnace called the gutterman would be wearing shoes like this. So this is your PPE for your equipment station. And then once, typically at 6 o'clock hour, their shift might have been done the molder. And when they're back on shift, they're going to start making molds again. Or it has iron, a whole bunch of other impurities. And also, because iron is found on the top of our surface, it has a lot of oxygen. And if you've ever left your bite out and you just open, and it turns orange because it rusts, iron ore is typically just rusted. The iron ore. So what Brian was doing is skimming it off. That is a pretty good looking stove plate. Let's get a round of applause for Mary here. That is a pretty good looking stove plate. Unless you want that one, we will.
What's the first bid?
This is.
I'll sign it.
Mary can sign it. At the end of the day, we can put a price tag on this. What do we think? $10. Keep it.
Brian maybe is
Cast iron one.
I even
Yeah.
still have part of the gate on it. That was the difference. Yeah, kind of the weight. So here's a cast iron version. You know, to kind of have this in comparison, but then feel that again.
Yeah, it's like double.
Yeah, it's actually aluminum is a third of the weight of iron. I never understood.
So that's the basics of the mold casting. Now, of course, they did it with aluminum instead of iron just for safety and for heat. But that's how they do it. Now we're going to go into a blacksmith shop and see if we can see a real forge weld.
We went deeper into the back. I guess that you like the better.
Sure.
What is that piece gonna be?
So that's going to be a piece of forge welding practice. So basically it's where you'd have two pieces of steel, you get them to around like 2,500 degrees or so, and it gets them to not like a liquid state, but almost like a really, really clay-like state where you squish two pieces like Play-Doh together and they stick and they form one piece, kind of that same basic principle.
Did blacksmiths back in the day make weapons for the soldiers back then?
They absolutely could have. I don't know if the ones here did, but yeah, you'd have blacksmiths that would have been doing like the gun barrels and really a lot of times like
And
the
the
whole
swords.
process for the guns, exactly, for like officer swords and cavalry swords, and even for the infantrymen for like the bayonets that they would put on the ends of the rifles, a lot of things like that. Even, but also they would work with other parts of the military, like so all the wagons they need to transport the supplies. Those need nails, those need hinges, those need all sorts of pieces to make the wagons work.
So
And those
the
are also made by a blacksmith.
blacksmiths have some very big jobs.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The blacksmith needed to do their job, so a lot of other professions, even like your doctors, needed blacksmiths to do their jobs because they need, they have to have their instruments to, to cut and to saw and to sew. And so all that stuff was made by a blacksmith.
So the Middle Ages, they have to make
There's definitely a good day where it'd be nice to have an apprentice in the shop.
So now you're using the same charcoal that comes out of the coal hearth, correct?
Absolutely, yeah. So like here they didn't use the iron that came out of the furnace, but they used the same hardwood charcoal that was used in the furnace. So I said for forge welding, which is like a higher end of temperatures for blacksmiths to do, it's going to be around like 2,500 degrees or so.
Sure.
Whereas in the furnace they would be using that hardwood charcoal to get to 3,000 degrees to smelt the iron ore. So here perfectly able to do it.
Whoa.
You see the sparks?
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
It's a little bit too much, but we'll give it a little go. So it got a little bit too cold, but it might still work though, because it was a little bit bubbly. And so you want to start with light taps when you're forge welding, because you just want to kind of set those welds in place. See if I can upset the end a little bit, because it got a little pointy.
Hey, what are you doing here? He's smushing metal. Fire can actually burn metal.
It absolutely can. I think that actually forged welded pretty well. I'm going to cool this off real quick.
It's black.
It is black, but it is also still very, very, very hot.
Oh yeah.
Even if it loses all of its color, this can still be hundreds of degrees, so you don't want to touch it. If you're ever around a blacksmith shop,
Ah.
you don't want to touch anything without talking to the person in charge first, because you don't want to get hurt. So if you look, you can still see a little bit of the line right there, but overall it looks like it forge welded pretty solidly. When I pulled it out, it was, I'd say, almost close to being too far gone to forge weld.
Gotcha.
It was a little bit burnt, and you can kind of see that with like all the pitting over
Yeah.
there. But it does seem like it got a pretty successful forge weld.
No, it's a blacksmith shop. Did a little forge weld there as a demonstration. Any questions about that, please put it in the comments. I will answer it to the best of my ability. But now we're going to go see the musket demonstration and get out of here because the rain's starting to come. So, kind of cutting us short.
The bullet has to fit in very tight, so you have to push it down. You actually would use grease patches of cloth to lubricate the bullet in order to be able to fit it down the barrel. But again, only about 10% of soldiers on either side of this war used rifled guns, because British and Hessian forces used them as well. Vast majority, smooth bore muskets with bayonets. So, it does. It's going to be loose, and that's one of the reasons why it has the decreased accuracy. Beyond 100 yards, the accuracy decreases dramatically. That same Colonel Hanger that I mentioned, talking about the accuracy of the rifle, he said, in all my experience, I am also convinced any soldier shot by a musket beyond 200 yards was never shot by the soldier that aimed at him. So, but nevertheless, keep in mind, he's still getting shot. One of the things that you would do back then is you would fire volleys of the American military today. Machine gunners have an unofficial motto: accuracy by volume. You get enough bullets going in the same direction, someone's going to hit something. And so coordinated volley fire, like these gentlemen are about to do, was vital to your training, not just individual marksmanship. Attention! Shoulder, firelock. Ooh, timing. Recover, firelock. Handle, cartridge. Prime. Shut pan. Charge with cartridge.
Training.
Draw. Rammer. Ram down. Cartridge. Return. Rammer. Shoulder. Firelock. Poise. Firelock. Cock. Firelock. Take aim. Fire.
Pretty amazing.
Prime and load. Watch the amount of time it takes to reload. Make ready. Take aim. Fire.
Well, that's about it. They're concluding a little early because of all the storms coming our way. But before we go, I'll go through the ironworkers mansion and show you what that's all about. Well, I'd be willing to bet they didn't have air conditioning way back then. That's a really cool staircase.